Hi everyone, welcome to No Forks Given, and I have today with me Dilshad Master. Dilshad is a speaker on resilience, change, and reinvention. She is also an entrepreneur and adventurer who has led treks into high altitude terrains in India and Nepal. She's also the first and only female to ever lead a civilian trek to the Siachen Glacier. And she did all this after surviving cancer. For 2 decades, Dilshad held senior positions in the media industry as SVP and COO for such brands as National Geographic, Star, ZTV, and UTV. So, welcome to No Forks Given, Dilshad.
Hi Neha. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And Dilshad's joining us from Bangalore. I'm also in Calcutta today while I'm recording this. And Dilshad, just to recap, the objective of these conversations are really to start a dialogue on identity in a slightly softer and tastier way by referring to food, because it's a very relevant topic these days. But when you start getting into social identities and discussing how they originated, what the stories are, you see a parallel in the food of those communities. And very often you start questioning what you mean by authentic, what you start meaning by identities, and you start unraveling interdependencies in this world. And so, with that background, I wanted to refer to the fact that you're Parsi, and I want to start by asking you what that means for people who don't know. I mean, the Parsi community in India is a very significant community, but a lot of people outside India do not know what that means.
So yeah, I think we are significant in terms of our contribution to business and industry, but
Yeah,
extremely insignificant where numbers are concerned. We are
yeah,
like 50,000, I think, all over the world now. So we
yeah,
literally need to be considered a tribe rather than a community. But
yeah.
the Parsis were the Persians that escaped from Persia in between the 8th and the 10th century when the Arab conquest of Persia took place. At that time, Zoroastrianism was the state religion of Persia. The fire temples were protected, the priests had influence. And once the conquest took place, Islam became more dominant. Zoroastrians, as in the followers of Zarathustra, that's why Zoroastrians, became a minority. A lot of them were being forced to convert, and there was, taxes, a special tax that was created on the Zoroastrian community. It's a gradual loss of status. So eventually, I think there was this large group of people that decided they wanted to retain their religion, did not want to convert, they wanted to be considered as Zoroastrians, and they fled to India and landed up on the coast of Gujarat. So that is what the Parsis are. So those people who came and settled on the coast of Gujarat began to be called Parsis. So we are the Parsis who fled Persia and came in to settle on the coast of Gujarat. Now, which is why you see a lot of intermingling between Gujarati and Parsis. We actually speak Gujarati.
Yeah.
We have stopped speaking our own language now for over 1,500 years. Our prayers are still in the Persian language, and a lot of us as children, when we grow up and have our thread ceremonies, what is called the Navjot ceremony. So we've retained our religion to a very large extent. We've retained our desire not to cohabit with non-Parsis, and but where everything else is concerned, whether you look at food or culture or the way we dress, our if you look at the way Parsis dress during weddings and stuff, we
Yeah.
wear what is called the chatte palle. The chatta palla is the Gujarati style. So,
Oh, saris.
Gujarat,
Yeah.
yeah, of the sari, the Gujaratis have their forward pallo slightly short on the hips, and the Parsis have it slightly longer. But just like that, even our food began to get, intermingled with the local flavors and the local tastes. So that's the history of the Parsis. And I think for the longest time, the Parsis have now struggled to retain their identity. I, for example, married a Punjabi. So
Yeah.
I was immediately what is termed as excommunicated from the religion. And I care two hoots about that because, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still a Parsi. And you
Yeah.
cannot take away my religion from me.
Yeah.
And therefore, I continue to. Do I practice the religion much? No, I never did, even before marriage. I'm not the Agyari fire temple going kind of Parsi, unfortunately or fortunately. But I do when I cook. I
Yeah.
love to cook Parsi food, and especially when I feed people, I love to feed Parsi food because I think that is the unusual part of our culture that nobody has yet been able to claim. Let's put it that way.
So, that there's that sweet story about when the Parsis arrived on the coast of Gujarat, the Hindu kings apparently showed them a bowl or something of
Yes.
milk and showed that it's full and there wasn't any space.
Yeah,
And the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Parsis
So the king sent
priests,
across the bowl
yeah,
of a glass of milk, actually, to the
yeah,
priests who had come with the community that had fled, and said that, look, we are full up. We have no place for you. And the priests put a teaspoon of sugar in the bowl. Well, I don't know if this is a true story or if it's apocryphal,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
love I love the
But even
story,
as a
so I love
metaphor,
it.
yeah, even
Yeah.
as a
And
metaphor,
so they put
yeah,
a teaspoon of sugar into the glass of milk and he stirred it and he sent it back and he said,
yeah,
this is how we come here to sweeten your community. Basically, that is what we were trying to
yeah,
do. We can intermingle, we can become one, and yet we can retain our own flavorings. And I think it's a
yeah.
beautiful story
It is, yeah,
of how we have adapted. And I think
yeah,
one of the biggest things about us is that we are hugely adaptable to any circumstance, you
yeah.
know. And I think that's the wonderful part. I love that story, and I always hope that it's a true story because
Yeah.
it's perfectly defines who we are.
And so over the years, I know that the Parsi religious leaders were in connect, would connect with the Zoroastrians in Iran to make sure that all their practices were in line with what they assumed was
Yes,
the right way of doing
yes,
things. They always
yes,
assumed.
yes,
But there were,
yes.
the letters that went back and forth had very little things like, oh, can I use ink uh, to
Yeah, I've
write?
heard of that too.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
which is made by a non-Zoroastrian and so on. But I think it was more an anxiety around maintaining your identity. But at the
Yes,
same
yes.
time, like Parsi food, given how small the community is, in some sense, is a very distinct cuisine, right, in India.
Absolutely,
And yet it
absolutely.
evolved. It evolved to some point, and then it became Parsi food. Can you just describe what you think or think of as Parsi food in today's day?
In today's day, yeah, I could describe it, but what it was originally would be really tough. But I'm going to give you a little
Yeah,
story before that, Neha.
yeah,
When I was living in Bangalore as a teenager,
yeah,
we had three Iranians who were living on the first floor. All right.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think I must have been like what 13, 14 years old. And I still remember their names, Jannat, Mujtaba, and Mohsin. And they were students. This was at the time in the early 80s when a large population of Iranians had fled to India for education and studies and things like that, and a lot of them had come and settled in Bangalore. So
yeah,
one day Jannat called us for lunch, and
yeah,
I was hugely fascinated because I was like, let's see what Iranian food is like because
yeah,
we had no clue, and so Jannat laid out this amazing spread for us. But what
yeah,
was the interesting part was right in the middle of the
yeah,
dining table was this long, this big, what we call as a patra, a
yeah,
vessel
yeah. Vessel.
with rice. All right. Now there were three, four, five, six, seven, eight people, so it was quite a lot of rice. All right. Now the top layer of the rice was beautifully dark brown. It was like almost like caramelized rice on top. And I remember my mother turning to me very quietly and obviously in complete ignorance. So, bless her, but she didn't realize it at that time, neither did we. So she said in Gujarati, Bichari thi chawal bari gaya, which means the poor thing has burnt her rice.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then I watched I watched Jannat proceed to take a knife, and no, she didn't do it. She gave it to her elder brother, which was like the
Yeah.
she gave him the honor of doing that. He cut the rice into 8 triangles, and the top layer of that burnt layer of the rice was handed over to each person in a plate. And that's when I realized, I was like, wait a minute. Nobody would do that to burnt rice, right? If it was me, I
Yeah.
would have
Yeah.
flipped
Yeah.
it over and I would have
Yeah.
served the pulao and,
Yeah.
at the bottom and tried to hide the burnt part. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking, what is this? Now, those were days when we didn't have the internet and we didn't have Google and we had no idea
Yeah.
what it was. But it was interesting because we went back home and said, oh, we ate burnt rice. But I learned later on that this burnt rice is called Tahdig. I think it's Tahdig,
Tadi. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Tahdig. And it is a speciality. And
Yeah.
the mark of a good cook in Iran is the ability to make this beautiful golden brown tahdig, which is then
Yeah.
handed over to every single person sitting on the dining table as a form of
Yeah.
community eating. Now, I found that very interesting because many years later, and I'm talking about now, in those days, Neha, I was never interested in cooking. I didn't know how to cook. I'll say that very
Yeah.
bluntly. My mother was an amazing cook. She still is. My mom used to cater for 300, 400 people for Parsi navjots and weddings. She was just an amazing cook. So entering the kitchen, kind of like, why the hell should I do it?
Okay.
So many years later, I realized that, when I looked at the tadi and I dug a bit deeper into, thankfully now we've got ChatGPT and AI and all explaining it to us, I realized that it was not very different from our dhansak rice. So
Yeah.
if you look at the way that Parsis eat dal and rice, so we have
Yeah.
something called dhandar, which is always cooked on auspicious occasions. It's basically plain yellow tur dal with a little bit of haldi and
Yeah.
salt. That's it. No tarka farka. And white rice. Now, when
Yeah.
we eat prawn curry rice or chicken curry rice or mutton, again, our curry has more like 32 different spices in it, I've counted. But again, it's on white rice. But why is dhansak, which is like the centrifugal force of our food, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who knows anything about Parsi food will first mention dhansak. And
Yes. Yes.
dhansak is always eaten with brown rice. It's never eaten with white rice. Now, if I put white rice on the table with dhansak, my mother's going to look at it and say, "Aiso, this is not dhansak rice." And
Yeah.
and how do we brown it? We brown it with caramelized sugar and browned
Yeah.
onions. And that's how we brown the rice. It's not as if we take white. We take white rice and we caramelize the sugar and then we pour it into the water while the white rice is boiling. And we have fried a lot of spices like your kali mirch, your peppercorns, and not cinnamon, yes. So we put all of that and then we put in the onion and then we dark fry the onion. Then we put in the rice and then we put in a little caramelized sugar. So the rice becomes brown. And I thought to myself, I said, this is our version of the tadi. Now, isn't that
Yeah.
interesting that, and I asked Mom, I said, Mama, you remember that what Jannat fed us? I said, how is this different? So she looked and she said, yeah, that's interesting. And we also put burnt onion on top of our pulao, which I hate. I don't like the taste of burnt onion in anything because I think it sweetens the dish. It sweetens the
Because
dish, which
the
goes
sweet.
back
Yeah. Yeah.
goes back to the Gujaratis,
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we have this little intermingling of different faiths and different cultures, which has brought about our food. So, can I say that we have strictly retained our religion? To a very, very large extent, yes. But have we
Yeah.
retained our food? No, I think we've taken a little bit from everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah,
And at
yeah.
some point, it became Parsi food, right? Because it's a process. When
Yes,
you came,
yes,
you were not eating what you call Parsi food today. And after this, we are worrying that it might be lost. But in between is where it's getting defined as Parsi food, right?
yes,
After
yes,
having, there's some level of awareness where you become Parsis and not just
Correct.
Zoroastrians who have fled
Correct.
Iran,
So this
right?
is
And
not
that, yeah,
Irani food anymore. This is
yeah,
not
yeah,
Persian food. They're not eating Persian
yeah,
food. So I went to this restaurant in Delhi many years ago. It was, I think, Jamba Chaloji or something. I can't remember. And they served dhansak,
yeah.
and there were like little cherry tomatoes floating in it.
Hmm.
Now, the people who were with me were also Parsi, and they were like, "Ah, Arey wah, kitlu delicious luggage." And my mother and I looking at each other's face and going, we have nothing floating in our dhansak besides the meat. All right. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
thinking, like, what the hell? And then my mom tells me, she said, in every Parsi household, the dhansak
yeah.
is made differently. Every
Hmm.
Parsi. So there is no household in Parsis where the dhansak is the same. In our family, because mum and mum's mom were like 10 brothers and sisters, and therefore the offsprings have all learned from one person, which is my grandmother. So in
Yeah,
my Masi's house in America, in my Masi's house in Jogeshwari, in my Masi's house in Bandra, in my house, in my mum's house in Pune, our dhansak will all taste the same.
yeah,
Very little difference. Our curry rice will all taste the same. It originated from one person from whom we got all the recipes. But if you go to eat dhansak, it it's very different. And in every household is very different. And then I ate something else in that restaurant called Berry Berry Pulao. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell is Berry Berry Pulao? So I must, mom is again eating, all right? And mom is very critical, I have to say, because she's
yeah,
one of the
yeah.
finest Parsi chefs,
Cooks,
right?
chefs, yeah,
And so she's 89 years old, so she has a right to be critical as far as I'm
yeah.
concerned. So she's eating and she goes, I said, what is this, Mama? Berry Berry Pulao? Sucha, what is it? She says, it's not Parsi, it's Irani. So I'm like,
A distinction, yeah,
yeah, I was like, okay, so yeah, they used to put those berries. I can't remember what those berries are. They're very specific berries. They're not available in India. They're actually imported from either Afghanistan or from Iran, and they're like liberally put over the pulao. And that was the berry pulao that we were eating. Not my favorite. I don't like anything sweet in my food, especially um, if it's very obvious. So, for example, where does the sweetness come from? I feel a lot of the sweetness we have picked up from the Gujarati food. So
yes, yeah,
the mithi dar as the Gujaratis call it, the sweet dal. They always put
yeah.
sugar, a little bit of sugar in it, and the dal
Sugar
is
in it, yeah,
absolutely delicious. But
yeah.
so what we Parsis did was we combined that sweetness with our food. So we have what is termed as khatto mitto khimo.
Hattu mittu, yeah, hmm,
Khatto mitto, which is sweet and sour. Now, khatto
yeah,
mitto khimo is keema, and the
yeah.
khatto mitto khimo is sweet and sour. So we
A
have
right
something
balance
called,
of, yeah,
yeah, the right balance of sweet and sour. We have something else called patio. Patio is again sweet and sour, made with bright red chilies, but it's got a slight flavoring of the sweet and a slight flavoring of the sour. We have something called Jardalu Saliboti. Jardalu is basically dried apricots, and
okay,
that goes into the mutton, and that's the
yeah.
Jardalu. Again, the sweet and the sour. So again, I think that has come from the Gujaratis. We never made the sweet and sour was never one of the original Persian dishes in from what I can gather. I think that has been picked up from the local cuisine as we adapted over the last 2000 years.
It's interesting that Iranian food has had a lot of influence in Indian food in different tracks. In North India, it's almost difficult to separate it. It is, when you go outside, and I mean, one of the reasons I started these conversations were because while we have a monolithic view of what Indians are, there's also a monolithic view of what Indian food is.
Correct,
Once,
correct,
right?
correct,
So it's like,
correct.
oh, there's butter chicken, there's chicken tikka
Yeah,
masala, there's
yeah,
biryani
yeah,
and
yeah.
such.
Curry, chicken
And what,
curry,
yeah, so chicken.
chicken
And
curry.
firstly, what is a curry? What is
It
a,
is.
and what's a curry flavor, right? Like, what do
Yeah,
you mean by
yeah,
curry flavor,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but when you start unraveling that and you start talking about it, you realize even the Indian, and you start exposing, hey, there's Gujarati food, it's sweet. There's this whole Bengali food is so different,
Yes,
and there's a
yes.
whole dessert, a whole set of desserts that are, the sweet tooth, the famous Bengali sweet tooth.
Hmm.
There's very
Hmm.
different food and so on. But when you start talking about the quintessential, what they think is Indian food, and then you start focusing on different groups and their ethnic, you suddenly start realizing what diversity of food there is. But North Indian food in particular, when you start tracing the ingredients, you go beyond the stereotype and say, oh, how would you describe it? Butter chicken has tomatoes, there is a lot of spice. Portuguese brought tomatoes, Portuguese brought potatoes. A
Yes,
lot of these
yes,
vegetables that aloo gobi came from the British, because they were
yes.
looking at a vegetarian culture, but there were vegetables like
Yeah,
eggplant and okra and all that were more native to India, but the ones like beans and all of them were brought in from somewhere else. So when we talk about authentic North Indian cuisine, we really forget none of this was there like even 200 years ago, but there was
absolutely.
some basic quality of Indian cooking that just kept adding ingredients but
So
stayed very inherently Indian.
I think we all borrowed, from
Yeah.
one another. So
But
if you
but
look
but
at it, all of
yeah.
us have the garam masala. Now
Yeah,
you can
garam
have
masala.
it in, you can have it like we don't put much garam masala in our food except as a garnish. So my
Yeah.
mother has always taught me that garam masala, adha chamach in one bowl of dal has to be put at the end and then don't fry it.
Yeah.
Just put
Yeah.
it at the end, let the water boil for a little bit, and then switch it off. Now,
Yeah.
the Punjabis don't make that. They put it in the
They
tadka.
don't. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so there are different ways, but the base, I think, is pretty much the
Yeah.
same. We all use the green chili and the red chili and the cinnamon and the taj and the lavang and the those
Yeah.
green pods and all of us use pretty much the same spices. But I think it's done in different permutation combinations, and
And I
that's what.
find there's one other correlation I see in a difference in the way the Iranian influence is absorbed in North Indian food and Parsi food is in the north it didn't come along with a set of people, right? There were either
Right.
invaders or there was when the Mughals came and settled, they bought Central Asian food which was different from Persian food. But
Hmm.
when Humayun lost his empire for 14 years, he lived in Persia. He was hosted by the Persian king, they were relatives, and he developed a passion for Persian food and the dining principles of sitting down where all your
Right, right,
senses,
right.
have
Yeah.
to be titillated and grain of rice has to be served a certain way, etc. So when he came back, he brought 300 cooks. And I just wonder because it was just techniques that came back, it got
Hmm.
amalgamated because they were trying to say, hey, they were absorbing it. But when it followed a set of people who were trying to define their identity, it developed into a distinct cuisine like Parsi cuisine. There is a time in which you decided, hey, this is Parsi cuisine. Beyond this, now I'm getting corrupted. Before
Yes.
this, it is not Parsi enough. So what I'm just it is just an observation where it's just a sense of how identity evolves, and then we start looking at what are the different attributes of that. It's like a brand, right? My
So,
brand attribute is a shade of
y-
blue and a shade of this and a shade of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So even if you look at Iranian food today,
Yeah.
I have never been to Iran, so much as I would love to, but I have friends who have. Now, they say, according to them and according to the older Iranians who are living there, that post the Islamic invasions, Iranian food has also changed. It has adapted.
Yeah.
It's become
Yeah.
more herbs are being used, which is not something that the Parsis used, not the Persians rather.
Yeah.
The food is more acidic, a lot more tamarind and more vinegar is being used, and there's no overt sweetness. Now the sweetness we know. So this friend of mine actually she said, if you look at it, the Parsi food in India seems to have retained a lot of its Persian profile,
Got it. Yeah.
whereas
Okay.
the Iranian food in Iran has now changed from being what we thought and we knew as Persian food, if you speak to the older
Yeah.
generation. And
Yeah.
the interesting part that I heard from a friend who's big into the culture of food, and she said that sugar was considered um, uh, sugar was considered a form of abundance. It was considered as that you had money and that you were generous enough to share it. So
Yes.
that's where the sweetness of the food comes from. So when that's what the Parsis adapted to, the generosity of the sugar, the sharing of the sugar, as in to say that, to intermingle with the local population, and that we are as giving as you are. So that
Yeah.
was where that sweet and sour and tangy and jaggery and sugar and all of that came into our. So if you eat our pork vindaloo, for instance, the pork vindaloo I make in my house, very different from the pork vindaloo that you will eat in Goa, or very different from the pork vindaloo that some Anglo-Indian Christians would make, because ours is like bloody hell, just full of red vinegar. It's like literally kattu and tikku, spicy and sour. And a lot of people can't take that. A lot of people, a lot of my friends go like, babes, we can't eat your pork vindaloo. But that's how we like it. And then we don't bring in any sweetness. I will have a lot of friends who will put in a little bit of jaggery because they think that it's too sour. But that doesn't work for us, because then that becomes patio. That's not
Yeah.
pork vindaloo anymore. So we have adapted not just to the local Gujarati cuisine, because most of them were vegetarians, but our non-vegetarian stuff has adapted to the states that were in and around. And then as we spread out further into the interiors of India, we began to pick up the taste buds of all the people that we were intermingling with. So
So
if you
that's
look,
why there's a lot of vegetables where you're adding meat or egg.
yeah, so but
And Gujaratis being primarily vegetarian, right? Yeah.
yes, so Neha, what I find, this is again my thought, not that I have
Yeah.
read it or anyone's story. I think Parsi food is the perfect balance of protein, lentils,
True. Yeah.
grain,
Yeah.
vegetables, and fat. All right. If you look at it, you look at just
Yeah.
dhansak. Okay. In my
Yeah.
dhansak, there is pumpkin, there is jimikand, there is brinjal, there is tomato, and onion, methi. I don't know what you call methi in English. And
Fenugreek,
there
I
is
think.
fenugreek leaves,
Fenugreek. Yeah.
and there is mint leaves. Now, so we've got the herbs, we've got the vegetables, and then we've got the legume, which is the arhar dal or the tur dal.
Yeah.
Now, and then you put in the meat in that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
a one pot meal of absolute delight, and it's got
Yeah.
everything you want in it. It's got the legumes, it's got the fat, it's got the herbs, it's got the vegetables, and then you put it on top of rice, and done, there you go, you've
Yeah.
got the most healthy
Yeah.
meal. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, so as we progressed, even with the vegetables, we decided we like that bhindi, but where's the protein? So then we crack an
Add
egg
an
on
egg.
top,
Yeah.
or we
You wrote something on LinkedIn about
yeah, yeah. I call the
this
par
piece, and
Indo.
yeah.
It's called the par
Yeah.
Indo. Indo means egg, par means on top. So everything has a par Indo on it. I cannot fathom a vegetable in my house that doesn't have an egg cracked on top. Now, my husband and my daughter, they were like, "What is this?" And I'm like, Bhaji par Indu? They were like, no, 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 no. So my husband would say like, the Indu goes here and the Bhaji goes here. Because the true Punjabi, he cannot in his head fathom that how can the two be mixed together. But
Together. Yeah.
that's how we eat it. We eat it on okra, we eat it on bhindi, we eat it on beautifully flavored tomatoes, we eat it on spinach, we eat everything. We crack an egg. And if we don't crack the full egg, we will take the yellow aside, we'll take the white aside and whip the white up into this nice peak. And then we'll spread it all over, and then that becomes the high protein vegetable that you eat. So I've been trying to get my daughter, because she loves vegetarian food, and she's not an egg eater. So I'm thinking now how to get egg into this child, how to get some protein into this child. So I started making this bhaji parindu without the yellow, because she hates the yellow. So I would layer this out, and again the face will. So she would take the white out, she'd place it aside, she would eat the bhaji first, and then she'll just stuff the white down her throat,
Like
because
medicine.
yeah, like medicine. But
Yeah.
I don't care, as long as you get your protein, I don't care. But that's how we eat, that's how we grew up.
Yeah.
I cannot fathom a single vegetable in our house that didn't have an egg cracked on it.
So another interesting thing is the Iranian cafes in Bombay. And why my head was going to that was because I was imagining what you were eating at home, and I was wondering where you would have gone out to eat a meal. Would you choose, like, Iranian cafes are not just a way of Parsis expressing their identity. It really has become a part of Mumbai's
Oh
identity. I mean, there
yeah.
were 700 of them, I read somewhere in 1960s. Now they're just a handful, and it isn't just the Parsis lamenting their decline, but I think all of Bombay does.
Yeah, so in fact, I was in Bombay in I think in January end, and I went to the Irani cafe next to Metro theater. Now, this
Yeah.
Irani cafe has been there for 4 generations. So, as a
Wow.
student in
Yeah.
Bombay 35 years ago, I had gone to the Irani cafe, and the same one I went again.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of the things are very similar to what we eat at home. So they're cutlets, as we call them, cutlets,
Cutlass.
and
Yeah.
they're sali boti. All of that is another is very similar. Now I think even the sali, if you ask me, this what we call as the sali, which is like very thin strips of fried potatoes. Now that's in the Gujarat, the Punjabis call it lacha. But we call
Okay.
it sali. But the lacha is thicker. Our sali is very thin and very delicate, and it doesn't retain the oil once you've cooked it. And we kind of garnish our mutton with that. We'll garnish our keema with that. I don't think that's Persian. That's coming in from somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And it gives you that crispy, the meat is totally off the bone, the sali is crispy, so when you put it in your mouth with the chapati, you get this burst of texture in your mouth. So we went to this Irani cafe, and all my friends are non-Parsi who came with us. There were like six of us who went together, and there was a line that was 25, 30 people long in front of us, and I was amazed. Not a single Parsi, not one Baba. They were all local Maharashtrians come to eat Parsi food. Now, my friend said, we want to eat akuri. So I said, chalo. Now, akuri is made out of eggs. For your audience that doesn't know, akuri is as famous as dhansa. All right, akuri is eggs and with a lot of spices in it and herbs in it. Now, I have been sorely disappointed with every form of akuri that I have eaten in India.
And Dilshad, let me just pause and tell you that I think on Facebook about 8, 10 years ago, you had
Yes,
literally stopped everybody and
yes,
said, guys, this is
yes.
everything that's just scrambled egg with peas is not a curry. And you had put the whole recipe
Yes,
out. And I remember
yes,
that
yes,
somehow.
yes,
And because
yes.
my
My
husband
God,
was
I don't
doing
know how
that
you
as
remember.
well.
Many years ago, I put it because
Yeah.
the art of the akuri is not in the recipe. The art of the akuri is in the texture. So I firmly believe that we grow up learning how to make akuri from our mama's womb because we are watching and watching and watching and the way it stirred and the way it stirred and the way the chula, the stove is reduced and then again you pick it up and then again it has to be creamy and it has to be fluffy and you cannot allow the protein to break down. Then that becomes watery. So I have ordered a curry in every single Taj hotel with this fervent hope that Taj hotel owned by the Parsis, kahin na kahin there must be some chef over there who knows how to make. No, it is the most. I just had a curry at the Taj Hotel in Calcutta, the new one that's come up. Horrible. A curry in the Bombay one, superb. That guy knew how to make it. But everywhere else, crappy. So, Irani cafe. The boys, all my friends said, let's have a curry. I said, take it, chalo, let's have a curry. I didn't expect anything out of it. And it was the most tepid akuri I've ever eaten. It was tepid. It was yellow in color, and I looked at it, and the texture wasn't there, and it wasn't the creamy that we are used to. And where was the green chilies, and where was the dhania and the kothmir and the coriander leaves, and I didn't see any of that. And I'm like, boys, this is not a curry. They said, you're going to forget it now. We're never going to get a curry from your house. I said, you're going to have to eat a curry from my house. We freaking know each other for 40 years. I cannot believe that you all have not eaten this my curry. This is not a curry. This is scrambled eggs disguised as a curry. All right. So I'm sorely disappointed. A curry, everybody says to me, Dilshad, send us the recipe. It's not in the recipe. It's in the way you cook it.
Technique or
Yeah,
something.
it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
technique, which is why I put up that video on Facebook 10 years ago. That
Yeah,
you
I
want to see
remember
how
that.
how a curry is really made? This is how you make it. So I have taught my cook now. She makes it wonderfully. Every once in a while, if she's distracted, even for 5 seconds, if you're distracted, the protein will break down. The curry becomes watery, or the curry becomes like burji. Now,
Yeah.
that's my point. I'm always saying this is not a curry. This is burji. It's not a curry. But I don't know when you came on my trek, did I feed you guys a curry? Because that's one
No,
thing
we
I
didn't have a
always
curry.
do.
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
always enter the
or
kitchen.
I, yeah, no. Or
I
did
enter the
I? No,
kitchen
no.
and I
I
make,
would have
you know.
remembered this because of the video, that the big deal,
So
or
I
it was
always
just
I
quietly.
usually enter the kitchen and make a curry for our guests. There are 15, 14, 13, 12 of them. But the team has to be told right in the beginning of the logistics team has to be told that make sure there's green chilies, make sure there's dhania. So, if you're at an altitude of 4,000 meters, the dhania has become
Yeah,
completely, the coriander is so wilted that you
yeah,
can't make anything. So I try and make it within the first day itself so that everybody gets their fill of the
right.
next day. Dilshad, you're making a curry again. I was like, no, this is not making a curry again because I make a dish this big, and then
Yeah.
and it's something I like. I like feeding people. It's very strange. Neha, I started to learn how to cook when I was in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, only because I was studying in the US and I could not bear to eat one more slice of pizza or fish and chips or whatever,
Yeah,
burger, sandwich. I was like, I cannot eat
yeah,
this food anymore. So then, those calls to mommy, in those days, phone calls were so expensive. So, Mama, send me recipe. Mama, can't eat this food. So, Mama would
yeah.
type out and she would, put them in an envelope, which would take 2 months to reach me. And then I started cooking. So, even today, I don't love to cook, but I love to feed. And I like to feed people who appreciate good food. So
Yeah. But
that's
does it
what
have to
I
be
like.
Parsi, or would you make other things as well?
I make other things as well,
Yeah.
but when people come to my house,
They're
like
expecting.
I
Yeah.
cannot tell you how many times this has happened that one day I decided I'm going to make Chinese. So a full spread of what pan fried noodles with chicken, and I made ginger chicken and fried rice, and you should have seen the look on my friends' faces. They were like, what is this? And I'm like, come on, guys, you can't come home and eat Parsi food every time. They were like, we're not coming to your house to eat this. So I
Yeah.
was like, that's so unfair. And Chinese food is harder to cook because everything has to be cooked immediately, right? It's not something
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I
yeah.
can cook and keep aside. I said, it's
Yeah.
all done on the spot. All the stirring is done on the. I'm like, no, 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 we don't want. Please stick to Parsi food. So now I have willy nilly just stuck to Parsi food. But then I try to make every time I invite, they will go dhansa. I'm like, no, I'm not making dhansa. You guys have to know that there is something more than dhansa. So then
The,
I'll pick up. My mom has written this recipe book. Let me tell you about this. And she has threatened me never to publish it. The recipe
okay.
book is for my brother and me and I, because her logic is that no food on the table should look the same. Now, if you start sharing your recipes, what's the point of it? That's her point.
Got it.
So
Yeah, yeah,
she's
yeah.
got, I think, about 250, 300 recipes. And
Wow.
I start digging through that. It's a Microsoft file, and I keep telling her, "Mama, publish it. Mama, publish it." No, no. And then she said to me one day, "If you publish it after I die, I will haunt you for the rest of your life." So I'm like, "All right, fine." So I'm hoping to God that my daughter Saira, at some point of time, like my batti jalod after 26, I'm hoping that someday she will, the book can go to her. But my brother and I, we are staunch followers of the book. And every time you feel like cooking something different, we'll rifle through the
If you want
pages and
Saira
see.
to, if you want Saira to adopt it, I think you can send her abroad to study, because I find,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you followed that little story recently. And it coincided with, so my son Shaurya is now in at college, right? And he
Right,
started
right.
ordering outside all the time Indian
Huh.
food, and he was like,
Yeah,
then I got some
yeah.
auntie to deliver to him, and he was like, and I'm like, Shaurya, it's very expensive, I'm already paying for your
Hmm.
dorm food, whatever. He's like, Mama, I'm going to become some Jains have got exceptions to eat and order from outside. And just the week when he
Okay.
and I have this conversation, there's this huge article that comes into mainstream or on Juggernaut or whatever about Stanford, how
Huh.
such a disproportionately large number of Indian students have just opted out of the meal plan where it's compulsory on religious grounds, claiming they're Jains because they just cannot eat the food.
Yeah,
And it's good
I
food,
can
I've gone and
understand
eaten
that.
it, but they've come from India. The Jains as a part of India are like less than a percent. But 17 to
Yes.
20% of
Yes.
Indians there in Stanford were just like, I'm a Jain, I'll get you a letter, I'll get you a letter. I immigrate off campus. So it became an article, of this whole like what's going
Yeah.
on with the Indian
Yeah.
students and their food. And I think this is just, yeah, and I'm on this little group as well of some Desi moms who are, were trying to help each other. And the main topic, the food, my child can't eat, he's starving or she's starving or whatever. So I don't know what the
Yeah.
obsession is with food with the Desis.
I think I don't think it's an obsession. Tell me something, Neha. When you travel
Yeah,
around the world, I'm now almost 60, I'll be 60 this year.
yeah,
Now, if I look back at the 40
yeah.
years of traveling that I have done, my memories of a place are always related to the food I eat. I don't know if that's unusual, but ask yourself, what is it about a place that you remember? So in
Yeah,
Italy, it will be that fresh pizza that came out fire oven.
yeah, yeah,
If you're looking at Himachal, or if you're looking at Leh or Ladakh, it'll be the thuppa that we ate. Or
yeah.
for me, every travel memory is related to food. I have come to that conclusion about myself. Every travel memory is related to food. And I ask a lot of people that they're like, no, come on, we saw that beautiful thing. We saw, I was like, huh, all that we saw, that was all on the pictures. And you can go through the photographs to revive those memories. But the food, it's always that. So I have noticed that with Syra, my daughter. We went to
Yeah.
Croatia, all right, the last April, and Greece. She doesn't remember the island name. We went to Nafplio, and then we went to, I can't remember the second island. And then we went to Croatia, and we went to Dubrovnik. And she doesn't remember any of the names. She doesn't remember. She has vague memories of having swum in the ocean in 16-degree water temperature. But she remembers the food. Mama, you remember the banana split ice cream? Mama, you remember the shawarma we ate in Dubrovnik? Mama, you remember that fish that came out with that lemon and that herb? That's how we remember for our trips.
Yeah.
Every trip we remember like that. So even when we go to Kashmir, if you've ever been skiing with us, the first stop we make is at this restaurant called Downhill, which is right at Tanmarg. All right. And what do we do there? The phone call has already been made when we've landed at the airport. Kebab taiyar rakhna, gushtaba taiyar rakhna, rishta taiyar rakhna. So it's all, the food is on the table. And that's how we start our trips,
Yeah.
For me, every trip I have made is related somehow or the other to the food we eat. Always. It's what triggers the memory, and then you can think of other things.
Because
But
I think it
food for me
involves
has
more
always
than
been the
one
center.
sense. No, it's also because food, the
Absolutely.
experience is, you smell it, you taste it, you see it, and there's,
Yes.
textures, etc. It's a full experience in itself. But and in the case
I
of,
think so.
in the case of Indians, when I was growing up, my parents thought they were adventurous with food, but that they weren't. They were just, it was just North Indian. They were primarily vegetarian. My father would eat some non-veg. It would be
Yeah.
out of the house. He tried to introduce me to it, but I just kind of, because it wasn't, it took me a while to start eating non-veg. Going out was like, oh, let's eat dosa. Very adventurous. A little bit of Indian Chinese, and that's about it. So when we traveled down south, my parents wasted so much time looking for Indian food. And I'm talking about in the 80s. It was, and but I feel like a lot of
Right.
the middle class families earlier were like that. The restaurant culture wouldn't take off. There were, of course, all these, even before that, caste related taboos about kisne banaya, who's eating, who's touched it, who served it. There are a lot of hardcore
Right. Right.
um,
Right.
people who used to do that, which made it created
Yeah.
an issue. My son was talking to me about an Indian origin kid he met from somewhere like Singapore or something, who was sort of bragging about the fact that when his grandfather moved to Singapore, he carried his Brahman cook, and I was just like, you know.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you've got
So,
that, yeah,
Neha, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
even today,
yeah,
I'm talking
yeah,
when Gujaratis, and I will specifically say Gujaratis, and I think to some extent the Marwadis, when
yeah,
they travel, group travel, like there are these huge travel agencies that only take these people, 30, 40 people in groups.
yeah, yeah,
They travel all over the world. They take their Maharaj with them.
yeah. They
They
do.
will
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
they stay
Because
in little
yeah, yeah.
rest hotels where they take over the whole kitchen for 3 months, and then they run these groups back to back, back to back, back to back, and the Maharaj is cooking. the food
No,
that they will
so
eat.
I'm absolutely aware of it, because otherwise they're not able to
Hmm.
travel. So these things are catering to that, and
Yeah,
it's to do with the taste
yeah,
even. Now it may not even be
yeah.
taboo of who's touching it as much as, but I mean, my
Exactly,
son is very
exactly.
grateful for so many of his the Gujarati kids that have gone from India. They've carried all these theplas and all. He says, "Mama,
Oh, the
I am
thepla.
desperate.
Yeah,
I'm going to
absolutely.
go and ask somebody to just heat up that thepla for me." Or like he's born and raised in the US, but he's looking for Indian flavors. I just find it so bizarre. And I was like, "You're looking
And they
for
will learn to
theplas?"
cook.
Yeah, so that's
But
what.
that's how they will learn to cook. They will learn to
If
cook
you're
like that
craving
only.
it, yeah, he has
Yeah,
started
yeah,
cooking a little bit now. He's saying, "I'm making tawa chicken. I'm doing this and that." And
yeah,
Dadi's
yeah, yeah.
there. Dadi
So
showed me how to do this. Yeah,
my brother left India long before I did. I think more than 8 years before I did. My brother is an amazing cook. Now, he's not big into Parsi food, but
yeah,
he's like me. He loves food. I like all forms of food. So he will make Mexican, he will make Chinese, he will make a beef steak, he will make, a pork roast. He's a fantastic cook. And
yeah,
his wife is very happy because she says, I've got a Parsi husband who loves to cook. What more do I want? So the cooking is left to him
yeah,
to do. But, and that's how he also learned. He says, yeah, how much of this pizza and burgers and fish and chips
yeah,
and salad and how much of that can you eat eventually? Finally, you really want to
yeah.
crave your own taste buds. So
And
I think we
and I
all
think
learn.
that's
So
the
I'm also thinking,
and it goes back to the whole thing about food and identity, because you're holding on to it somewhere. I mean, this my son has always liked Indian food. He spends his summers here, so it's
hmm,
not surprising that he's craving Indian food. I made sure we had an
yeah,
Indian meal for dinner, freshly made, whatever they ate for lunch or breakfast.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
he had not had Gujarati food till college, and he's
hmm,
found commonality on it, and with all his Gujarati friends. And I think
yeah,
that's the change that's happening. But I had interviewed a gentleman called Niraj Singh earlier. He's of Indo-Fijian
hmm,
origin. He had made
hmm,
fish
oh,
for us in UK, which tasted authentically Indian to me. It was his mother's recipe from Fiji. He grew up in Australia, and he said, "No, it's absorbed from Fiji, etc." But I was like, it could taste like anything from Kerala too, because he thought he had added coconut milk because his North Indian
right,
his parents were North
right.
Indian. But there's something,
Right.
you're holding on to that memory and passing it on. And
Yeah. And I
I
wouldn't be
find,
surprised if if his antecedents were Indian, because a lot of
no,
Indians
they are
landed up in
Indian. That's why
Fiji at some point.
that's why
Oh,
they
there you
left. He
go.
is Indi-Fijian. He says he's
Yeah.
Indi-Fijian.
Yeah.
And I said,
So there you
how
go.
have
Yeah.
you retained the Indian part of it? And but
Hmm.
here's the difference: communities that I've noticed that were torn away from where they were are more diehard in holding on to it somehow. And those that have
Yeah, of
willingly had
course.
to go to some extent are, more consciously looking at, hey, we are here, in that spirit of like, I've got to absorb. And that's the general
Hmm.
theme a little bit. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. But,
And
for,
I think if you even look at Parsi food,
yeah,
um, like I the usual suspects are dhansak, Kolmino patio, dhandar,
that
that
Patrani
fried chicken.
Machi.
So what
Yeah.
patrani machi. So we have this concept called lagannu bhonu. I don't know. Have you ever
Uh,
attended a Parsi wedding? So
no.
lagan means wedding. Nu bhonu
Yeah.
means food a, of a wedding. So lagan nu
Yeah.
bhonu is a very standard, and interestingly, it is served on a green patra, banana leaf.
Leaf. Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
never served on plates. It's served on green. That's the traditional way that we serve our lagannu bhono. It's put on these green banana leaves, and it starts with an achar and some crispy, and then comes this big piece, double chopped chicken leg, deep fried. Then comes the mutton pulao and dar, and then comes the sali boti, and then comes the patrani machi. So for the vegetarians, it's like really nothing to eat
Yeah.
besides the dal, which is got no meat in it because the meat has been put into the pulao, and it's hard for the vegetarians to even appreciate lagan no bhono, because there's nothing there that's without an egg. Even the rice will have a fried egg on top. Your dessert will be lagan no custard, and that custard is made out
Hmm.
of egg.
Egg.
So
Yeah.
so a lot of Parsi. I don't even know if they exist, but I'm sure they do. Parsi vegetarians do exist. Must be such a contradiction in terms. I think it's like an oxymoron, but they do exist, and I often wonder what they eat because even the dal has got
Hmm.
the chicken broth in it
Nice
or the
broth.
mutton
Yeah.
broth in it. That's why it's so bloody
Yeah.
delicious. Otherwise, that dal will taste like nothing. And I often wonder, what does a Parsi vegetarian
Parsi
eat? I'm
vegetarian.
just like, I don't even, they exist. I know they do, but
Yeah.
often wonder what they eat because I cannot imagine anybody eating Parsi food that's vegetarian and not
But
even
that's the
egg. So
irony
the
of it.
other day, let me tell you, there's a nice Parsi restaurant here in Bangalore. It is actually
Yeah.
called Figs or Fins or something. And underneath, very small, it said Parsi and more. So my eyes went straight over there. I go, Parsi and more. So I asked my friend, I said, Prashant, ye kya hai? What is this park? He said, damn good food, damn good food. So I said, Chalo, let's go. So he said, come, let's go. So we went. So I saw there was, of course, a very long menu of traditional Italian, continental cuisine. There was a small section of Parsi food. So I was kind of like, why would they combine? Then I realized it was owned by the Rustamjis in Bangalore, which is a very famous contractor, the builders. And one of their kids, I think their daughter-in-law, she's the chef, and so she was cooking the Parsi food. So then I told my friend, I said, Prashant, you have to eat the Baba food. You can't come here and order pasta, for heaven's sake. It's just not happening. So he said, what do I order? So I saw bhaji parindu. So I said, order this. So he says, what is this parindu? I said, spinach, masala spinach, and on that they crack an egg. And his face was like, why? I was like, will you just shut up and eat it? And it comes with these delicate, thin chapatis, which are the typical Parsi chapatis. We don't eat that roti pulka. Our chapatis
Yeah.
are
Okay.
very thin and they're fluffy. And so I said, get me two chapati and get me bhaji parindu for him. My God, he loved it so much. He said, "Now you have to teach me how to make it." So he's a vegetarian, but he eats eggs because that's the only
Yeah.
protein he gets. So now he's cracking an egg on every sabji that he's making. I was like, there's a way to cook the sabzi as well. You can't just keep cracking an egg on everything. But that's the first time
Like a
because
sabzi
I can't
bhuji,
believe
bhurji or something. Yeah.
yeah. So he said, I can't believe at
Bindi
the age of
bhurji.
60, I finally learned there was something called
Yeah.
parindu. I was like, well, that is what Parsi food is all about. And I
Yeah.
ordered fish cutlets because for me, fish and mince cutlets are the hallmark of a good Parsi cook. All right. It has to be that stringy, fluffy. The meat has to be perfectly cooked, not very spicy, the right amount. It was delicious. And I was like, oh God, thankfully there's one Parsi restaurant that I finally loved the food. The chapati was beautiful and patla and thin. And I was like, all right. So I step out and I see this very old, very lovely gentleman, and he looks at me, and I look at him. I say, "Hello, uncle. How are you?" And he goes, "You're a Parsi." I said, "Yes, I'm from a Parsi." And he so I am. And I think he called himself. He said, "Noshir Rustamji." So I said, "Oh, this is the Rustamji's restaurant." He said, "Yes, yes. My daughter-in-law is the chef or granddaughter. I don't know." So I said, "Oh, lovely. So what is your name?" I said, "Dilshad Master." So he looks at me and he goes, "Are you Nargish Master's daughter?" And I said,
Wow.
"Yes." Oh my God. And then he called the chef out and he called the sous chef out and said, this is Nargesh's daughter. Do you know who you just fed? And I called up my mom as soon as I got out. I said, do you know that after 35 years, somebody still remembers your cooking? And I think that
Wow.
is what Parsi food is all about. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
And it was really yummy. I said, I'm coming back here because I realize I may not, if I'm dying to eat good Baba food, I'll just head out to the restaurant. I don't have to cook it
You
on my
found the
own.
place. Yeah.
Yeah, I found the place finally where the tomatoes are not floating on the dansad dal.
I have to try. I got introduced to Parsi food very, very late in life because of this whole everything that's unfamiliar we wouldn't eat. Um, uh, but
Yes.
but
But
Thank
you're
you so much.
vegetarian, no?
No, I eat everything now. I've also evolved over time, and I have,
Good. Yeah.
I didn't. It started off fairly vegetarian. My brothers ate chicken. It wasn't that I wasn't in. Chicken is the only meat. A lot of so-called meat-eating North Indians are actually just eating chicken, right? Even if you go to Punjab, the first time I went to Amritsar, they're like, "Oh,
Yes.
meat-eating Punjabis," and I was like, "No, it's all cooked
No, no.
everywhere, and maybe one
Chicken.
Amritsari
Yeah,
fish."
yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know where the fish
Yeah.
is coming from because there's no water body.
So
Um,
I make chicken
yeah,
dhansak at home, and my mother's
yeah,
like, Marghi no dhansak? Marghi is chicken.
yeah,
And I was like, she says, no, dhansak is always mutton. I was like, but mama, we don't eat
yeah,
mutton. I don't eat red meat. So,
yeah,
suck it up. This is all you're getting.
yeah.
And she's like, okay, I mean, if there's no choice, I'll eat it. But very hesitatingly, she'll eat the chicken because the dhansak is always made with mutton.
Made a
That's
certain way. Yeah,
the
yeah.
traditional dhansak. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done variations of moussaka now with chicken, which I started with lamb at home and
Yeah.
just evolved to
Yeah.
make it
Yeah.
lighter and like healthier and because then
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
family, of course, they will eat goat more than American lamb. They find that it's gamey and smells, and I find that the
Yeah,
Americans
I
who come here and
agree.
eat
I
mutton go back
agree
and say it's
too.
chewy. So, that's what they're used to.
Yeah,
Like, I've
yeah,
had Americans
yeah.
who've come here and then said, I attempted mutton, don't want to try it again. It's a little chewy. And I'm like, really?
How
So,
polite.
yeah. And my family will go back and say, no, not this lamb, if you can't find mutton. So we move to chicken.
Ah, yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's what it is.
I
Evolves.
frankly didn't know the difference between the two for the longest time. I had no clue what the difference between mutton and lamb was. I discovered it much later when I actually started cooking in America, and then I realized, like, why does this? I asked
Thing,
my
yeah,
mom, I said, Visru, Visru lagech, And she said, what do you mean, Visru? I said, yeah, I don't know, it's like an off taste. And she said, oh, you
smelly.
must have been
Yeah,
eating lamb. And I was like, oh, okay. I
yeah,
didn't know there was a
yeah,
difference between the two.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Even the chicken, and again, I eat everything, but I grew up more vegetarian, so it's more to me. It's like you might have meat and then accompany it with vegetables. For me, it's the reverse. I'm eating vegetables and I'm adding a bit of protein or meat or whatever. So
hmm,
I'm less
hmm,
discerning.
hmm,
But the
hmm.
other three members of my house very staunch about big meat eaters, the kids and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. Yeah, and now
So
with the recent thing about protein, because it's a big deal,
yeah,
Like
upset. Yeah, yeah. Uh,
I'm obsessed with protein, so I eat it in
yeah.
everything.
That's what I've started looking at. So sometimes it's tofu also. There's a lot of tofu getting made at home
Yeah,
now. But don't feel like
yeah,
eating meat.
yeah.
Then
So I don't eat tofu because I have hypothyroid, so I don't eat
okay, yeah,
any goitrogen. So tofu, soya,
yeah.
all of that is a
So
no-no
yeah,
for me.
yeah,
So I'll end
yeah.
up
Then you
having
have to
breast of
rely on
chicken
eggs and meat
mostly.
a lot. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
eggs and chicken mostly.
Good. Yeah. So thank you so much, Dilshad. I really enjoyed our chat. I just want to sum up that
I
I find
did.
it very interesting that the Parsi experience to me is like very, very interesting and something that requires a focus in today's day and age because it's an example of a community immigrating to another country, very meat eating, going to a very vegetarian part of India. Everybody's there's happy, everybody's coexisted, different cuisines have evolved, a sense of identities have overlapped, and it's become part of a larger Indian identity, right? So I wanted to use Indian
Absolutely.
food and put a focus on it, peel the layers of that onion to show that there's more to the Indian identity or any identity when you start looking at all the micro elements of what makes it what it is, and how we just crib over things that are unnecessary, and things evolve when they need to, and they stop when they don't need to, and so on.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you so
And
much.
I just like to add, I just wish that some people would, not some, people would realize that there's more to Indian curry. There are like
Yeah,
hundreds of different versions of the curry.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
when I see this menu in London which says chicken curry, and I'm like, my first question is, what kind of curry? And then I get this puzzling, like, what do you mean, what kind of curry? There's only one kind of
Curries.
curry. I'm like, no, no, there isn't. But anyway, we won't go there.
No, and
Yeah.
I've started using some of these meal kits in the US to make my life easier because I wanted fresh meals, and I would get a curry
Yeah.
powder. And I was like, no, no, no. Anybody who sends me a curry powder, that meal kit is
Yeah,
out. You know, that's
that's
not happening.
highly
Curry powder.
suspicious.
Yeah. The British started this
Yeah.
concept, right? And they went
Yes,
back to
yes,
the UK and they were trying to bottle that experience. And in order to feed these,
yes,
they started doing it. And fine, you were trying to combine some essential ingredients, but it's not just the essential ingredients. There's a sequence in which they're fried. You know, there are a lot of things that
yes,
happen in trying to capture
absolutely.
that. And
Yes.
dhansak
So
was
if you
one of
look
those
at my,
things that, yeah.
no, I said if you
You
look at
were
my
talking
mom's
about garam
cookbook,
masala earlier, right?
yeah, like my mom's cookbook, she
Yeah.
will very clearly tell you which spice goes in first because which one
Yes.
burns faster. So, a lot of
Yeah.
people put haldi, but haldi burns, turmeric burns
First,
really,
yeah.
really quickly. So that's the
Quickly, yeah.
last spice that you need to put in before you bung in the water because
Yeah.
otherwise you've got burnt turmeric, and that changes the
Yeah.
flavor of your food. And the garam masala, which is a mixture of I think 5 or 7 spices, depending upon who's making it, is always put in the end because that's the flavoring. That's not supposed to be the essence of the food. That's only the garnish on top after you've finished making everything. So yeah, there is definitely a systematic approach to which spice goes
Yeah.
in first. Coriander,
You can't
cumin,
just
which one burns
grind them and
faster?
sell it. I was
No,
saying to
no, no.
everybody else, you can't just grind them into a powder and call it curry. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not going to work.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, it
Yeah.
doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Every home is different, every way they cook it is different, and the emphasis is also different. My mother's family from Rajasthan don't brown their onions a whole lot. I never noticed the difference. I
Right,
just ate and enjoyed what I liked. But my
right.
Punjabi in-laws side, my husband is very particular. He'll say, oh, the onions are floating. I had never noticed them before. Oh, they must be browned, etc.
Mm.
Now that I'm looking into the history of these things, I realize this browning obsession has come from Iran. This whole
Yes,
brown the onion,
yes,
the
yes. That's what I
biryani
said. That
part of the
tadig.
biryani.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
even the onion birinj is which is North Indian, came with the Persian influence in North India and in Punjab, where they have to brown the onions and lasan and all, whereas may not have gone all the way down to Rajasthan, where when now I'm trying to explain to them and this is how it's done, then I've realized I can't tell them how it's done. That's their food. That's how it's done for
yeah,
Rajasthani food.
yeah.
There is no pan Asian cuisine or identity for that matter. And there's a lot more there when you start learning about it. Every home has a different way they cook things, even within every community. And every person, in that sense, is also distinct and unique.